You guys can see my screen, I presume?
Yes.
Yes.
Well, good morning, good evening, good afternoon. I'm Jason Forrest. I am a data designer and writer here in New York City. I'm the director of the McKinsey Data Visualization Lab, and I'm also the editor-in-chief of Nightingale. This is a magazine by the Data Visualization Society. You can see a lot of my articles there. We just did a print magazine. Also, I usually take this moment to pitch to everybody. We're always looking for writers and contributors, designers. We pay everybody. We pair you with an editor. We publish your work and we promote it. So it's a pretty decent deal. And as often mentioned, I'm one of the 3 folks that helped to found the Symbol Group. So one could call me a data viz obsessive, especially in the case of pictorial statistics. I've been obsessed with collecting as many digital and physical copies of this kind of work as I can, because I've really been obsessed with trying to learn the methods and logic from the inside out. On rough estimate, I have about 300 physical books and pamphlets. That actually comprises a lot of the number there. And about 1,000 different digital books, papers, archival materials. And before I jump into anything, I'm super happy to share my collection, about 80% of which I have digitized on a Google Drive. So and I would love to share it with anybody that wants it. Just put your email, either you can send it to me, or you can just put it in the chat, however you want. Reach out to me on Slack or on Twitter or whatever, and I'm happy to give everyone access. And in addition to that, I also just want to caveat this talk and say that, this is such a luxury for me to talk to people that actually know what I'm talking about. And, if I make any mistakes or you have any suggestions for how we could kind of tell the story of pictorial statistics, then please just let me know. It really takes a village. And I always just want to kind of throw that out there as a condition that I'm happy to learn from your expertise as well. It's my obsession with data visualization and, as I said, pictorial statistics that helps me every day in my work at McKinsey. Certainly the most discussed piece that I've had, at least publicly, was the cow chart you can see here, which swept through social media during COP26 in October of 2021. And I had no idea that plopping a cow into a 3D bar chart would capture people's imaginations. But it's a pretty good example of pairing an image with data to create a memorable link to an idea. And while it's not an isotype, it holds the same principle that pictures aid in the understanding and retention of information. And I actually have a whole lot of slides to go through. So if I have enough time, maybe I'll do a time check towards the end. I'll talk a little bit more about my work, but otherwise I'll stick to the script. And so my obsession with pictorial statistics just generates a lot of questions. And one of the biggest questions that I've really labored over for the last several years is, why didn't Isotype continue? And that's why I've come to see Otto Neurath as only a step in the bigger story of pictorial statistics. And today I'm going to walk us through this kind of S-like timeline. And in doing so, I'm hoping to show the connection between Isotype and a lot of current design work that you see today. So let's start with the history stuff, the prehistory technically. This is an advertisement from 1924 by Thomas Cleland. We see the pictorial representation of cars and money, as well as a bevy of luxurious illustrative detail. It was designed by Thomas Cleland, like I said, and who went on to be the first art director of Fortune magazine in 1929. And as you all know, Otto Neurath defined pictorial statistics to communicate more directly with common people. Much like the advertisement before, Cleland understood, and Neurath understood exactly why pictorial statistics worked by visualizing the context of the subject matter and depicted the data as iconic symbols. He was able to illustrate boring statistics in a way that was easier to read and remember. More importantly, his method also quantified graphic elements to expand his design into a system for communication. This pragmatically allowed his team to work quickly and create isotype charts for a wide variety of quantitative and qualitative data. Empiricism was at the core of Otto's practice, so the need to hypothesize and test the designs was central to the Vienna method of pictorial statistics. Only by testing and iterating on the design could the educational objectives of the team be validated. Marie Neurath often hosted school groups and asked questions of the children to validate the efficiency of the isotype designs. On a basic level, this is the core concept behind design thinking, roughly 30 years before the most commonly cited beginnings in Johnny Arnold's creative engineering from 1959. There's a whole lot more to this whole concept of isotype team being kind of proto-design thinkers. But what's really important to keep in mind is the dual function of experimentation and audience feedback. As we've been speaking about Neurath, as we've been speaking about during the symposium rather, Neurath attempted to build a universal picture language, but because he was focused on the international adoption of this method, he had to adjust his standards for the interpretive meaning of symbols per the needs of his target audience. As an example, here's a diagram for the Tuberculosis Association, and the kind of squeamish Americans wanted to present death in a more palatable way, as demonstrated by the urns in the chart. And so far, pretty much everyone here either helped to write this history or should know it pretty deeply. So let's zoom out and take a look at the last 100 years. And I'm going to try a little special effect. Does this thing work? Oh my gosh, can you see the spotlight? Woo. Yes, I guess so.
Yeah.
All right, so this is a timeline that I've made of the last 100 years. You see Otto Neurath and Marie along the top, and their legacy eventually spans over into infographics, graphic journalism, and data journalism. Below that, we see the kind of evolution of icon designs ultimately into emoji and beyond. And then at the bottom of this page, we see kind of important developments in technology as it relates to all of the above. I'll pause here for 1 second because it's a lot to take in. It's worth noting that the first desktop computers came out in 1977 and the first iPhone came out in 2007. So that kind of light green color on the slight right is a 30-year period. The influence of isotype also was felt across a lot of different types of designers. This diagram shows a rough timeline of influence rippling out to various practitioners from the printing era to the digital era, and is arranged on a scale from economics at the top to education at the bottom. And there are literally thousands of pictorial statistics out there that have never received any study or documentation. I feel like this group in particular owes it to ourselves to find them, research this work, and to help understand how their designs worked and how those designs impacted their audiences. So I asked the question again, why didn't Isotype continue? My research suggests that it didn't necessarily go away as much as become distributed across many different types of use cases. In doing so, its foundations were diffused across different aspects of design. Otto channeled his prodigious knowledge into the Vienna method. Marie Neurath then elaborated on the isotype technique, while Rudolf Modley pushed further into pictorial diagrams. This is kind of the second part to that other chart. These visual communication formats were then used to communicate to business people and educate children and adults alike. These cognitive models were then applied to explain complex stories as infographics and visual journalism, connect concepts to icons, and use as information design hallmarks. But let's go back into the history for a few more minutes before we get into the present. And as you know, the creative engine behind Isotype was comprised of Otto Neurath, the team leader, Gerd Arndt, the design lead, and Marie Neurath as the transformer, a role between creative director and data scientist. I think Marie Neurath innovated equally as much as Otto and Gerd. Keep in mind, Otto died in 1945, and she continued to push the boundaries of the system until 1971 on her own. Along the way, she made lots of different innovative designs, such as this spread showing two isotype charts side by side. This piece was created 2 years after Otto's passing, and we can see Marie further exploring the systematic application of isotype into the structured diagram of similar but not equal divisions of government. By using existing icons and drawing parallels in color and direction, we see the qualitative data of two very complicated systems very easily. Each process flows top to bottom and left to right, but the pages themselves establish 2 frames for comparison. Marie continued to work in children's science books because of sustainable living, and it continued her interest in visual education with a very willing audience. Her background in Isotype set her apart from other designers, and her visual pragmatism proved very influential and widely applicable to various types of educational materials. Here's Marie's listing in a who's who of educational illustrators from the year before she retired. And I cannot tell you how excited I am to hear Rudolf Modley's name repeated so much in this conference, as I consider him to be a truly underexplored figure in design history. A former intern of Otto Neurath's, Modley moved to the US to be a proxy for Neurath's American ambitions, but it turned out that Modley proved to be an equal match in ambition. After failing to find a job as a young lawyer in the midst of the Great Depression, Modley turned to the only unique skill he had as a fresh immigrant to the US, practicing pictorial statistics. Here we see one of Modley's first effective designs for a report for the Tennessee Valley River Authority, or the TVA. And it was one of the most successful projects during the mid 20th century. This design, which is interesting, is actually a collaboration with Philip Reagan, who Ihara spoke about with his animations yesterday. A strict focus on the graphic clarity of visual information was central to all of Rudolf Modley's pictorial statistics. As he practiced, he naturally continued to find visual solutions that extend the core concepts of Isotype, such as comparing information as repeatable units. Part of Modley's interest was also in the reuse of icons for different purposes, and he began to use them to establish scenarios that he called pictorial diagrams. These images took numerous forms, such as an image of a building or a city square, with each element representing some relationship to the subject as a whole. Sometimes they reflected organizational structures, hierarchical data, or flows of information. Pictorial diagrams not only conveyed qualitative data in a way that efficiently communicated a relationship, but they were also fun. This comic-like quality helped to attract people to Modley's educational mission. In both examples, the little people aren't just used as a representation of a category of information, they have evolved to actually become those symbolic people living in the scenario. The left image shows the departments of the then young Museum of Modern Art in New York, while the right is from a book of the same year that pushes the comic and illustrative angle to its most editorial extreme. But before I continue, I also want to acknowledge the value of misinterpretation. Much like previous eras in history, ideas spread faster than authoritative sources, and adventurous designers often ran with the idea before they fully understood the details. Otto Neurath was afraid of imitators, as he thought they would endanger the purity of his concepts and cheapen the whole field of pictorial statistics. Of course, they were also very much a threat to his business model. While history has forgotten many of the imitators, these designers continue to push the concept of Isotype in a new direction. Their designs were influential in their own right, and they only partially created them in reference to the original Isotype team. For example, Omar Pancoast Goslin began publishing pictorial statistics shortly after Neurath first appeared in Survey Graphic in 1931. As you can see, this graphic is a blend of bar chart and pictogram, kind of emulating an Isotype, but applying a far more decorative style to the icons and chart format. While it's not entirely successful as a chart, it breaks almost every rule of Isotype. The icon design is visually exciting, and the chart does have a point that's easily understandable. And I'll save what I know, or maybe I should make a whole other article or report about Goslin's story for another time. And while many of his designs are a bit awkward, they're striking. They are striking, and they explore the concept of Isotype a little differently. And I've actually started to even think of Goslin's work as being from like a parallel universe, as many ideas many unique ideas appear in his designs, but obviously inspired by the concept of pictorial statistics in his own way. Here's a design that I think is especially fantastic. This is from Rich Man, Poor Man, a socialist-leaning economics book for adult education. The visual pun of a money bag that doubles as a skull may very well be lifted from some kind of vernacular gag, but employing this in pictorial statistics heightens its impact. The hand-drawn skulls vary slightly, which humanizes them, and repetition is played on for visual interest. Mapping the mirrored icons to such huge quantities of money and human lives makes a sobering connection between war profits and war deaths. Another important contribution to the story can be found in Fortune magazine. Fortune was launched in 1929, exactly as the US Great Depression started, but it was an overwhelming success built largely on the publisher's previous endeavors, Time magazine and Life magazine. Because of the American influence of Maudley and to a degree of Neurath through Survey Graphic, the lure of Isotype was very attractive for artists of Fortune. One of them was Irving Geis, who leveraged many aspects of Isotype, but blended it with a more illustrative approach. His version of, quote, Little People also employed an additional layer of human to pantomime the results of monthly surveys. So hopefully you can see where this is all going. Isotype influences pictorial statistics, which then goes mainstream. We have Rudolph Maudley to thank for the widespread American distribution as well. His Telefact series was widely syndicated to American newspapers between 1938 to 1945. In addition to exposing millions of Americans to pictorial statistics through Telefact, Maudley also published several books of icons and instructions on the technique of combining them into charts. This is very important to our stories. In many ways, Maudley, the student, had accomplished more of the populist goals of his almost mentor, Otto Neurath. He had found pathways to widely recognizing isotype concepts, and he was also sharing the tools for more people to learn the technique. At this time, I believe, for Maudley, the cause of pictorial statistics was his main measure of success. In addition to Telefact, Maudley also had a significant influence on public education through an extended series of inexpensive pamphlets by the Public Affairs Committee. Each pamphlet sold for 10 cents, and by 1961, the committee had sold over 30 million pamphlets to schools, local governments, and other social and civic groups. As we mentioned yesterday, these works show some insight into Maudley's continued explorations into panel-based storytelling. On the left, we see a 1944 grid-type pictorial statistic showing the difference in caloric needs based on body type. In the center, we see an idea elaborated on by a splinter company from the Pictograph Corporation called Graphic Associates. I still don't really know much about Graphic Associates, despite many hours of research in old newspapers. I've found multiple job posting and certainly a lot of their designs, but the generic nature of the name of the company, Graphic Associates, as well as its primary designer, Henry Grant Adams, has made it difficult to find anything. This design is an especially surprising graphic comparing scientific tests with the observations of group dynamics. Here's another one that I just think is fantastic. It's really great. But it bears repeating that Telefact was syndicated by the same companies that place comics in newspapers, and we might even view Telefact as a kind of educational comic, as the method of creating and distributing both would have been the same. In 1945, Maudley sells the right to Telefact, and it quickly comes to a halt, but it's replaced by much lesser works from AP News features. These authorless charts become increasingly comic-inspired throughout the late 40s and all but abandon the systematic approach to the design. And while pictorial statistics were eroding in newspapers, we see true isotype charts appear frequently as design elements in Herbert Bayer's World Geographic Atlas in 1953. Not only do we see direct reference to multiple types of isotype charts, but we see them employed with a visual panache that few designers could have pulled off. Bayer was clearly adept at the underpinnings of the technique, but he was also inspired by a modernist playfulness to layer illustrations, bringing about an aesthetic sense that the original isotype team could have never condoned. There are many examples of educational materials that combine aspect of isotype pictorial diagrams to make an entertaining but information-laden experience. One notable case is from the Florida Atlas by famed cartographer Irwin Reyes, who explored extravagant pictorial statistics in several books towards the end of his life. These four examples show how the richly styled illustrations build on the isotype technique, but continue in a more realistic cartoon style. We see icons, but not necessarily representing categorical data, but living their best lives for comparison. Rudolph Maudley makes one last appearance in the lecture in 1968. As mentioned several times, this essay by Maudley and Margaret Mead called for a systematic collection of symbols to be used as an international Esperanto. I think it sounds pretty similar by now. Maudley is again clearly trying to make good on the ideals of Neurath in transcending cultural communication towards a visual language. But let's go back in time before, take a little step back in time before we continue. This is a series of icons created for the famed 1936 Olympic Games in Berlin. Clearly, the designer of these icons must have had a direct inspiration from the work of Gerhard Arndt, which Maudley likely drew on as well. And here we see a visual history of Olympic icons developed from their modernist purity in 1936 through their illustrative pictures in 1952 and back to graphic simplicity in 1964, as Vibo spoke about yesterday. And the standardization of icons became all the rage with Henry Dreyfuss' Symbol Sourcebook in 72, which featured essays by Marie Neurath and Rudolf Maudley, who did a lot of the legwork as well. Let's be fair to them. Maudley's followed suit by adding a few thousand icons to his Dover publication in 1974, which led to further standardization by the American Institute of Graphic Arts, the now ubiquitous icons designed by Roger Cook and Don Shanofsky by the US Department of Transportation. In doing so, these symbols transcended data entirely to become what they symbolized for billions of people across the planet and across languages. In 1975, Edward Tufte taught a statistics course to journalists who were studying economics at Princeton. These lectures became the foundation for his landmark book, The Visual Display of Quantitative Information. Tufte was a scientist, and we see a deep disregard for the kind of pictorial statistics used in journalism. His tone throughout the book is that data viz is best when focused on the fastest reading of the data, and that any distraction from this is at best junk and at worst unethical. The book, for better or worse, set the tone for generations of designers, scientists, and communicators of all types. The chart on the right is a great example of Tufte's ideal for effective chart making as created by his collaborator, John Tukey in 1981. And I think it's super important to note that this is created by a computer. And that's when things start getting really interesting. Computers are fun, they're intuitive, you can make money with them. We develop a relationship to them that we don't with any other type of technology. As a result, human-computer interaction becomes an area of study. While professional artists are still hand-drawing amazing data viz designs in the 80s and 90s, we see more and more people turn to these rudimentary computers to collect the data as well as draw the visualizations of that data. And across the next 2 decades, we see a massive advance in color and interface design with each new release. Our relationship with these computers becomes so empathetic that they even become personal computers. Throughout the evolution, we see icon design and informational systems consistently advance. Along the way, software companies look towards collaborative methods of building such complicated systems, and the field turns to design thinking to find collaborative ways of improving the pace of innovation. As a result, our computers and our operating systems become a data visualization of how we are using them. In the same decade that computers were rapidly evolving, so was the concept of the graphics desk at a few notable news outlets. Our ability to capture data, parse it into a message, and then design that message increasingly became more digital, if not in practice, than in intention. This kind of graphic journalism ranges from Peter Sullivan's investigative diagrams to our friend Nigel Holmes' illustrative charts to John Grimwade's precision illustrations. These 3 artists echo the intention of Isotype in the ability to present an overall structure for a nuanced understanding of statistical information, which at this point became known as infographics. Their graphic appeal is a way to cut through the information overload and teach through the eye. One of the coolest people in computer history is easily Susan Kare, one of the first people hired to work at a fledgling company called Apple Computers. Kare developed the user interface of sliders and buttons, wrangling just a few pixels into an intuitive wayfinding system. Her unique approach provided a new transparency to the technology that could be used for almost anything. Interesting to zoom in on that previous photo and see Henry Dreyfuss' Symbol Sourcebook here at arm's reach. In full transparency, Vibo Baker found this. He deserves all the credit for finding this really alleged smoking gun of design history. So you get the credit, buddy. The personal computer not only captured the interest of the general public, it also positioned the computer as a cultural phenomenon worthy of study. Don Norman's book on the psychology of mechanical engineering transformed the field of human-computer interaction into user experience design, which we now just call UX design. A year later, Richard Saul Wurman, a cartographer that invented the term information design, published his brilliant but critical dialogue about how to navigate a world seemingly flooded with digital information. These two books together form an interesting duality that echoes many of Otto Neurath's core theories of design directly for an audience and optimizing to ensure that understand that your audience understands the communication objective. Each book takes different approaches towards discussing how the design of technology impacts our ability to use, interpret, and live in a world of information. And this is the first use of an emoticon from an extremely early email in 1982 by Scott Fahlman. It seems so obvious now, but it speaks to a core premise of Isotype, the need to quickly understand the context of information. In Isotype, this could be a quantity of cars represented by a picture of a car, but in this case, we see a smiley face from a few typographic characters. Emoticons also speak to our need to entertain, to joke, and to designate sarcasm, which may not be readily apparent. It's also obvious that emoticons turn into actual pictures. As Susan Kerr developed the Apple symbols based on some part of Henry Dreyfuss's book, these pixelated icons naturally become a shorthand for how we located items on the user interface. One could argue it was also how we began to signify subjective emotion. With each system upgrade, the pictures, now called emoji, could have more high resolution and increasingly more personality in their diversity. And I mentioned a bit ago that, that anything could be made with computers, and central to this was the importance of non-programmers to interact with these new design tools. It's interesting to consider just how new much of this technology is. PowerPoint is invented in 1989. Photoshop and HTML are both invented in 1990, only 32 years ago. CSS in 1994 and JavaScript in 1995. Google launches in 1997 to help us navigate this information overload, and social networks incorporate instant messaging complete with emojis into how we communicate and relate to our friends and family. And learning through the eye is now central to almost all aspects of digital design. An important issue for computer technology is how to create the highest quality image with the least amount of space. Hopefully you noticed that digital imaging and data visualization was central to how computers were marketed to the public. So the need to develop high quality images takes two roads: pixels and vectors. Pixels are discrete, vectors are descriptive, and two Adobe tools corner the market for each. Photoshop is for pixels, Illustrator is for vectors. iPhone is released in 2007. It's literally a revolution felt as much culturally as technologically because the computer is freed from the desktop. Digital plasticity is applied to any aspect of real life. Computer culture merges with business culture, and digital tools are full of icons, and every interface becomes a system. In 2011, D3.js is introduced. It is essentially a set of directions for drawing vectors in a web browser. It becomes the foundation for any data visualization, for many of the data visualization platforms. Because the browser is drawing the charts, you can animate and move them any way you want. And D3 was created by Mike Bostock at the New York Times. By inventing this technology, the graphics desk evolves into data journalism, and visual storytelling becomes a technology hub. When humans do, and then humans do what humans do best. They color outside the lines. Data visualization becomes human, more illustrative, and stories become the focus of communication. While dashboards become ubiquitous and Edward Tufte's influence on efficient data visualization becomes essential for certain use cases, data journalism leverages aspects of scientific illustration and graphic design and symbol design. In 2011, a company called UI Bootstrap is released. for free, and millions of web pages adopt common standards designed for user experiences. The importance of free, standardized, easy-to-use icons becomes a must. Font Awesome was launched in 2012 with 302 vector icons. But Font Awesome was standardized, and designers around the world needed to show off their own icons. The Noun project allows those designers to share their vectorized symbols. But one thing that deserves a tremendous amount of discussion, and at least, if nothing more than a cursory nod in this talk, is commerce. Otto Neurath was regularly chasing funding, and making a living from design can be just as challenging today. The act of designing and selling individual icons can be a career for a select few designers. While the internet started out decentralized, it has evolved into a platform for capitalism and a pervasive layer of marketing. And that's why data humanism is so important. Created as a manifesto by Giorgia Lupi in 2013, data humanism espoused a more hand-drawn approach and a focus on the people behind the data. Coupled with a new focus on ethics and technology and data, we arrive at the end of our journey that started with an empirical consideration of education design and ended with a renewed effort to get back to the people behind the screens. So the question of why didn't Isotype continue might not be the right question. The question is changed really into how can we use this to bring pictorial statistics back? Certainly the concepts are very familiar. They're at this point just very disconnected. All right, so that's the main part of my talk. I'm at 21 minutes. Do I have another 4 minutes to talk about some of my own work?
Definitely.
I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. I'll be fast. Like at the beginning of the talk, I've been experimenting with a lot of isotype concepts in my work at McKinsey & Company for the last few years. The charts on the right are for a major in-office weekly survey. When I showed the leadership these designs, they were extremely skeptical. They said it was too complex. It didn't have enough numbers. Why do we have to have all these colors? But I was able to at least win that argument, and it's now become so popular. This has become the de facto way of reporting this data inside the organization. In addition, teams that I've led have experimented on interactive isotypes to varying levels of success. But one of the things that I tell my team all the time is that everything is an experiment, and you can pretty much guess who I got that from. And as you saw on the page before, my team has been experimenting with lots of different icon designs because inclusion and diversity are now core issues in humanizing our data and making relevant communications. Can the little people have hairstyles? Can they wear the same clothes and the same pose and have different heads? Here are a few examples of our experiments using a prefab illustration package called Open Peeps. Can every person have a different skin type? Do they even need faces at all? What about face masks for COVID? What's too much information and what is not enough information? And the reality is that I don't think any one of us know. Additionally, I've moved away over here from the very blocky squared shoulders of Arntz, the puzzle person as we call him, to a softer shouldered and wider hip character. But just recently, about a week and a half ago, I shared this a version using this figure on the right. And during the client discussion, all of the women in our audience pointed out, why is it all men? So I think the answer is the experimentation will continue. As I mentioned, interactive charts are also a new and very challenging opportunity to solve for Isotype, as filterable data sets would allow for multiple views of the same data. Using pictorial statistics for interactive data viz means that new rules need to be developed to account for issues of rounding, both in the icon design and for the technical implementation. This project that we did for a larger initiative called the COVID Response Center shows alternating male and female farmers to display purchasing journeys in agriculture. The color is mapped to physical versus digital sales. So you can see how it's kind of differently applied. And then I'll truly end. I think I might have another 2 minutes to go through this with the most fun project that I've made with my wife, artist Jen Ray. It's called Data Vandals. we have been doing a number of performances in and around New York City. This was our first project called New York Alive. It was bone-chillingly cold that day. So you'll see not only nary a leaf on a tree, but all of us well bundled up. What we did is we gathered data from a lot of New York City's open data portals, and we also conducted our own survey. And we then created cardboard icons to represent effectively 10% of that data across 10 figures, with 10 people holding them. The performance was totally chaotic. It was a blast. It included a dancing rat named Ratsy, as you can see there, and a 9-year-old Godzilla. But to be honest with you, why not? Everything is an experiment. And the icons themselves are especially novel as created by my wife. These icons are the answer to the question, what has New York City robbed you of? From the bottom, 40% people said money, 30% said their inhibitions, 20% said youth, and 10% said privacy. And we had a lot of fun with these, really trying to navigate the line between humor and representation. This led to a second performance this last summer, and we moved into more story-oriented icons as we needed to tell the story of the Lower East Side. Of course, the Butts made a command performance. Here's a photo, everybody. The city is yours. We actually kicked it off with an illegal street parade where we blocked traffic for several blocks, and we did that last summer. We then compiled all of our work into a gallery exhibition earlier this year. And next year, we're planning on a whole lot more of this kind of fun. So that's it. The history of pictorial statistics is so much more rich than we've given it credit for. I think it may be one of the more interesting stories in all of design history to tell, but the concepts that define it have been so diffused through design practice, intention, and technology that tracing the thread has become difficult. My goal is to help to put that into sharper relief. And as I said, I welcome anyone for their comments, their suggestions, and invite you all to share with my archive. That's it.